Colonel, I understand the Smithsonian's crisis. My family has generations of experience in historical preservation. We can help.
Today you'll discover the incredible story of Marcus Thompson, a dedicated tomb guard at Arlington National Cemetery, whose unconventional skills led him to solve a mystery that had stumped the most renowned museum conservators in America. Get ready for a narrative full of unexpected twists and the power of thinking outside the box. Before we begin this amazing story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The morning mist hung heavy over Arlington National Cemetery as Marcus Thompson began his shift at the tomb of the unknown soldier. For 12 years he had walked these sacred grounds with unwavering dedication, his polished boots clicking against the marble in perfect rhythm. At 42, Marcus possessed an unusual combination of military precision and an almost mystical understanding of historical preservation techniques passed down through generations of his family. What most people didn't know about Marcus was his extraordinary background. Before joining the Old Guard, he had spent years working alongside his grandfather, Samuel Thompson, a master craftsman who specialized in restoring Civil War artifacts. Samuel had taught Marcus ancient techniques for preserving metal, wood, and stone that had been forgotten by modern conservators. These methods, some dating back centuries, had been carefully guarded family secrets. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Marcus noticed something different in the atmosphere. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the chief conservator from the Smithsonian Institution, was standing near the administration building, her face etched with frustration. She was accompanied by two other specialists, all looking defeated and exhausted. Marcus had heard whispers among the staff about a crisis at the National Museum of American History. A priceless, sacred reliquary, dating back to the Revolutionary War, had been severely damaged during a recent exhibition setup. The artifact, known as the Washington Memorial Reliquary, contained personal items that had belonged to George Washington himself, including a lock of his hair and fragments of his prayer book. The reliquary had been crafted by master silversmiths in 1776 and was considered one of the most important religious artifacts in American history. However, during transportation, the delicate silver casing had cracked, and the internal mechanisms that protected the sacred contents had become jammed. Worse yet, the artifact had begun showing signs of rapid oxidation that threatened to destroy the contents entirely. Dr. Harrison and her team had spent 3 weeks attempting various restoration techniques, but every approach had failed. The reliquary's unique construction, which combined multiple metals and organic materials, made it incredibly sensitive to modern conservation methods. Traditional chemical treatments had proven too harsh, while gentler approaches weren't stopping the deterioration. As Marcus completed his morning inspection, he overheard Dr. Harrison speaking frantically on her phone. "I don't know what else to try, Director. We've consulted with experts from London, Paris, and Rome. Everyone agrees that the artifact is beyond saving with current techniques. If we don't find a solution within 48 hours, we'll lose everything inside." The weight of her words struck Marcus deeply. This wasn't just about preserving an artifact. It was about saving a piece of America's spiritual heritage. The reliquary had been blessed by chaplains who served alongside Washington and had been present at some of the most pivotal moments in the nation's founding. Marcus remembered his grandfather's words. "Sometimes, boy, the old ways know secrets that modern science has forgotten. When all else fails, trust in the wisdom of those who came before us." That evening, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Dr. Harrison's distressed expression. After his shift ended, he drove to his small apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, where he kept his grandfather's extensive collection of restoration journals and tools. Samuel Thompson had meticulously documented every technique he had learned from his own mentors, creating a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge. Marcus spent hours poring over the leather-bound journals, searching for anything related to mixed metal artifacts from the 18th century. Around midnight, he found what he was looking for: a detailed entry about a technique called sympathetic restoration, which his great-great-grandfather had used to repair damaged religious artifacts during the Civil War. The technique involved using materials that were contemporary to the original artifact, combined with specific environmental conditions that mimicked the atmosphere in which the piece had been created. Most importantly, it required a deep understanding of the craftsman's original intentions and methods. The next morning, Marcus made an unprecedented decision. He requested an emergency meeting with his commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell. Marcus had never asked for special consideration in his 12 years of service, and his impeccable record gave weight to his unusual request. "Sir, I believe I can help with the situation at the Smithsonian," Marcus said, standing at attention in the colonel's office. "I have specialized knowledge in historical preservation techniques that might be applicable to the damaged reliquary." Colonel Mitchell raised an eyebrow. He was aware of Marcus's family background, but had never imagined it could be relevant to a national crisis. "Sergeant Thompson, this is highly irregular. The Smithsonian has the world's leading experts working on this problem. With respect, sir, sometimes the old ways hold solutions that modern science overlooks. My family has been preserving historical artifacts for over 200 years. I'd like permission to examine the reliquary and offer my assessment." After a tense moment of consideration, Colonel Mitchell picked up his phone. "Dr. Harrison, this is Colonel Mitchell from Arlington. I have someone here who might be able to help with your reliquary situation. I know it sounds unusual, but I'd like you to meet with one of my guards." Doctor Harrison's initial reaction was skeptical, but desperation had made her willing to consider any possibility. She agreed to meet with Marcus that afternoon at the museum's conservation laboratory. When Marcus arrived at the Smithsonian, he was struck by the sterile high-tech environment of the conservation lab. Banks of computers monitored temperature and humidity, while sophisticated equipment hummed quietly in the background. Dr. Harrison introduced him to her team, Dr. Robert Chen, a metallurgy specialist, and Dr. Sarah Williams, an expert in organic material preservation. "I appreciate you coming, Sergeant Thompson," Dr. Harrison said, though her tone suggested she held little hope. "But I should warn you, we've exhausted every conventional approach. The reliquary's condition has actually worsened since yesterday." Marcus approached the artifact with reverence. The Washington Memorial Reliquary sat under a protective glass dome, its silver surface marred by dark oxidation stains that seemed to spread even as he watched. The intricate engravings that depicted scenes from the Revolutionary War were becoming obscured, and the delicate hinges that protected the sacred contents had seized completely. "May I examine it more closely?" Marcus asked. Dr. Harrison hesitated. "The artifact is extremely fragile. Even the slightest vibration could cause further damage." "I understand, ma'am. I've been handling irreplaceable artifacts my entire life." As Marcus studied the reliquary, he noticed details that the other conservators had missed. The silver wasn't pure. It had been alloyed with copper and tin in proportions that were common in colonial America. More importantly, he could see evidence of the original craftsman's techniques in the way the joints had been soldered and the patterns of the hand engraving. "This piece wasn't made in a workshop," Marcus said quietly. "It was crafted by someone working in field conditions, probably during the war itself. The maker had limited resources and had to improvise with available materials." Dr. Chen looked puzzled. "How can you possibly know that?" Marcus pointed to subtle irregularities in the metalwork. "See these tool marks? They're from improvised instruments, not professional silversmith tools. And the alloy composition suggests the maker was working with recycled metal, probably from damaged military equipment." Dr. Harrison and her team exchanged glances as Marcus continued his examination. His observations were revealing details about the artifact that their sophisticated analysis had missed. There was something almost intuitive about the way he read the metalwork, as if he could understand the original craftsman's thought process. "The oxidation pattern isn't random," Marcus continued, running his eyes along the damaged areas. "It's following the stress points where the original maker had to compromise the metal's integrity. He knew this would be a weak spot, so he tried to compensate by adding extra material here." He pointed to a slightly thicker section near the base. Dr. Williams leaned forward, intrigued despite her skepticism. "Even if that's true, how does it help us? The damage is still progressing, and we can't stop it with any modern technique." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing through his grandfather's teachings. "The problem isn't the artifact itself," he said finally. "It's the environment we're trying to preserve it in. This reliquary was made to exist in the conditions of 1776, not in a climate-controlled laboratory." "That's impossible," Dr. Chen protested. "Controlled environments are essential for preservation. Temperature fluctuations and humidity changes would accelerate the deterioration." "Not necessarily," Marcus replied. "My grandfather once told me about a similar case during the Civil War. A damaged religious artifact was actually stabilized by exposing it to the same atmospheric conditions under which it was created. The metal had developed a kind of memory, and it responded better to familiar environmental stresses than to artificial stability. Dr. Harrison shook her head. Sergeant Thompson, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we can't risk exposing a priceless artifact to uncontrolled conditions. The liability alone would end my career. Marcus understood her position, but he also knew they were running out of time. Dr. Harrison, with respect, your current approach isn't working. The artifact is deteriorating regardless of your controlled environment. What if we could recreate the specific conditions of colonial America, but in a controlled way? What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Marcus pulled out his grandfather's journal and opened it to the relevant page. According to this, we need to replicate the atmospheric composition of the 1700s. That means higher humidity, different air pressure, and exposure to natural temperature variations. But most importantly, we need to use period-appropriate materials for any restoration work. Dr. Chen studied the journal with growing interest. These techniques are completely unorthodox, but the scientific reasoning is actually sound. If the metal was formed under specific atmospheric conditions, it might indeed respond better to similar environments. The question is, Dr. Williams added, do we have the materials and expertise to recreate 18th century conditions accurately? Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the laboratory. That's where my family's collection comes in. We have tools, materials, and techniques that date back to the Revolutionary War period. My great-great-grandfather actually worked on similar pieces during the Civil War, when many Revolutionary War artifacts were being damaged and needed restoration. Dr. Harrison was torn between professional caution and desperate hope. The Reliquary's condition had worsened significantly since morning, and she was facing the very real possibility of losing one of America's most important historical artifacts. Even if we agreed to try your approach, she said carefully, we'd need to document everything meticulously. The museum's board would need to approve such an unconventional treatment. I understand, Marcus replied. But we don't have time for lengthy approval processes. The oxidation is accelerating. By tomorrow morning, the damage might be irreversible. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the gravity of the situation. Finally, Dr. Harrison made a decision that would either save her career or end it. Sergeant Thompson, I'm going to take the biggest professional risk of my life. If you're willing to take full responsibility for the outcome, I'll authorize an emergency treatment using your methods, but I need your word that you're absolutely confident in this approach. Marcus looked at the deteriorating reliquary, then at the faces of the three conservators who were placing their trust in him. He thought of his grandfather's words about the responsibility that came with preserving history for future generations. Dr. Harrison, I give you my word. This technique has been tested by my family for over 2 centuries. If we act quickly and follow the procedures exactly, we can save this artifact. Dr. Harrison took a deep breath and reached for her phone. I'm calling the director. We're going to need special authorization to proceed with an experimental treatment. As she made the call, Marcus began mentally preparing for the most important restoration work of his life. Everything he had learned from his grandfather, every technique passed down through generations of his family, would be put to the ultimate test. Within 2 hours, the museum's conservation laboratory had been transformed into something resembling an 18th century workshop. Marcus had retrieved his grandfather's tools and materials from his apartment, including hand-forged implements that had been used on similar artifacts during the Civil War era. Dr. Harrison had managed to secure emergency authorization from the museum director, though not without significant resistance. The board members were horrified at the prospect of using primitive techniques on such a valuable artifact, but the alternative was watching it deteriorate beyond recovery. Marcus began by carefully adjusting the laboratory's environmental controls. Instead of the sterile, stable conditions typically used for conservation, he gradually introduced controlled variations in temperature and humidity that mimicked the atmospheric patterns of colonial America. The key, Marcus explained as he worked, is to understand that this artifact wasn't created in isolation. It was made during wartime, exposed to campfire smoke, varying weather conditions, and the natural oils from human handling. The metal developed its characteristics in response to these environmental factors. Dr. Chen monitored the changes with sophisticated instruments, documenting every variation for the official record. The oxidation rate is actually slowing, he reported with amazement. As the humidity increases, the chemical reactions seem to be stabilizing. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The metal is remembering its original state. Now comes the delicate part. Using tools that his great-great-grandfather had crafted by hand, Marcus began the painstaking process of addressing the mechanical damage to the Reliquary's hinges. The modern Conservators watched in fascination as he employed techniques that predated their scientific training by centuries. "These tools are incredible," Dr. Williams observed. "They're designed specifically for working with colonial-era alloys. Modern instruments are too precise for this type of metalwork." Marcus carefully applied a mixture of materials that his grandfather had prepared decades earlier, including beeswax that had been aged in specific conditions and metal compounds that matched the original alloy composition. Every movement was deliberate and reverent, as if he were performing a sacred ritual. "My grandfather always said that restoration isn't just about fixing damage," Marcus explained as he worked. "It's about understanding the soul of the object, respecting the intentions of the original craftsman, and bridging the gap between past and present." As the hours passed, the transformation was remarkable. The dark oxidation stains began to fade, revealing the intricate engravings that had been hidden beneath the corrosion. The seized hinges gradually loosened, responding to Marcus's gentle manipulation with the period-appropriate tools. Dr. Harrison found herself holding her breath as Marcus approached the most critical moment, opening the reliquary to assess the condition of the sacred contents. If his techniques had failed, the internal damage could be catastrophic. "This is it," Marcus said quietly. "If the internal environment has been properly restored, the contents should be stable." With infinite care, he applied pressure to the restored hinges. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click that seemed to echo through the laboratory, the reliquary opened for the first time in 3 weeks. Inside, perfectly preserved, were the sacred items that had belonged to George Washington, a lock of his hair, still retaining its original color, and fragments of his prayer book, the ink still legible after nearly 2.5 centuries. Dr. Harrison gasped, tears forming in her eyes. "It's perfect. Everything is exactly as it should be." Marcus carefully examined the internal mechanisms, noting that the microenvironment within the reliquary had indeed stabilized. The combination of period-appropriate atmospheric conditions and traditional restoration techniques had not only halted the deterioration, but had actually reversed some of the damage. "The internal humidity is optimal," Dr. Chen reported, his voice filled with wonder. "The organic materials are showing no signs of degradation. In fact, they appear to be in better condition than when we first examined them 3 weeks ago." Dr. Williams was documenting everything with her camera, capturing images that would revolutionize conservation science. "This is going to change everything we know about historical preservation. The implications for other artifacts are enormous." Marcus began the process of securing the reliquary in its restored state, using techniques that would ensure its stability for generations to come. As he worked, he felt the presence of his grandfather and all the craftsmen who had come before him, their knowledge and dedication flowing through his hands. "Sergeant Thompson," Dr. Harrison said, her voice thick with emotion, "you've just saved one of America's most precious historical treasures. I don't know how to thank you." Marcus looked up from his work, his face reflecting the satisfaction of a job well done. "Dr. Harrison, this is what my family has been preparing for across generations. We're the guardians of forgotten knowledge, and sometimes that knowledge is exactly what the world needs." The news of the successful restoration spread quickly through the museum community. Within days, Marcus Thompson had become something of a legend, though he remained characteristically humble about his achievement. The Washington Memorial Reliquary was returned to its place of honor in the museum, where it would continue to inspire visitors for generations. Dr. Harrison submitted a comprehensive report documenting Marcus's techniques, which was published in the International Journal of Conservation Science. The paper became one of the most cited works in the field and sparked renewed interest in traditional preservation methods. Museums worldwide began reaching out to Marcus for their most challenging restoration projects. The Louvre contacted him about a damaged medieval reliquary, while the British Museum requested his assistance with deteriorating Civil War artifacts. However, Marcus remained committed to his primary duty at Arlington National Cemetery. He negotiated an arrangement allowing him to consult on special projects while maintaining his position as tomb guard, understanding that his true calling was honoring the fallen while preserving artifacts that told their stories. Colonel Mitchell became one of his strongest supporters. "Sergeant Thompson represents the best of what we stand for," he told reporters. "He combines military discipline with deep respect for history and courage to act when others hesitate." The Smithsonian established the Thompson Fellowship for Traditional Conservation Techniques, providing funding for researchers to study historical preservation methods. Marcus became the program's first director, training a new generation of conservators in ancient wisdom. Dr. Harrison, whose career had been saved by Marcus's intervention, became a close collaborator. Together, they developed protocols for identifying artifacts that might benefit from traditional restoration approaches, bridging ancient techniques with modern scientific understanding. Marcus's grandfather's journals were digitized and made available to conservation professionals worldwide, transforming family secrets into shared knowledge that could benefit humanity's collective heritage. The Washington Memorial Reliquary became a symbol of preserving traditional knowledge alongside technological advancement. Visitors often requested to hear the restoration story, and Marcus occasionally gave presentations about the intersection of military service and historical preservation. Years later, continuing his duties at Arlington, Marcus reflected on that pivotal moment when he chose to step forward. His decision had changed not only his life, but contributed to broader understanding of how past and present could work together to preserve humanity's most precious artifacts. His story reminded everyone that expertise comes in many forms, and sometimes the most valuable knowledge is held by those who maintain unbroken connections to previous generations' wisdom. The sacred reliquary continued inspiring visitors, its restored beauty serving as testament to combining respect for tradition with courage to act when history hangs in the balance.